Want to kick off today's webinar. So you've got myself, Ellie, here from Pathway CTM. I'm sure a lot of you will have heard my voice quite a few times over the past few weeks in these daily webinars that we're hosting, but this is a particularly special one. I know that every day we've had our Pathway CTM ones, whereas today we're joint hosting this with Historic England, focusing on their opportunities and their roles. So I'm so happy to see so many of you actually dialing in, because I know that we've spoken to a lot of you previously around your interest in this sector and Historic England specifically. So first and foremost, I just want to say well done for every single student that's dialed in, because from our perspective at Pathway CTM, anyone who's taken their time at 5:30 to understand a bit more about roles and opportunities and brands which we're working with, then you're definitely one step closer than the next person in terms of their opportunities and getting closer to a brand such as Historic England. So first and foremost, well done. That's great enthusiasm, and we will be following up with every single one of you to help you understand a bit more and answer any questions you might have. So that's my initial introduction, and thank you. I want to talk a little bit initially around kind of housekeeping and how it's going to work today, this webinar, just to make sure we're all super clear in terms of how you can ask any questions or get involved in today's webinar, because I know that the whole idea of going online, lots of us are doing it at the moment, and it's very relevant, but I want to make sure that you're all very sure in terms of how you can ask questions or get involved. So in a moment, I'll be introducing our special guest for today, who can give a bit of background in terms of who they are and what they're going to be talking about. But first and foremost then, so if you are dialed in online, you will be able to see a presentation which we're going to be referring to today. That's absolutely no problem if you're not. We will be referring to slides, but we'll be sharing those with all of the attendees today, so there's no concern around missing out, and you'll be able to get the value of the content today regardless of that. If you are dialed in online, then via this Zoom function that we're using at the moment, you can either ask questions through the chat box, which is available to all panelists, and I'll be reading those questions out later in the session when we have our Q&A session section of the webinar today. And secondly, you can also ask any questions through the Q&A box. So there's two slightly different sections. What I'd recommend is, if you do have direct questions that you want us to ask and hold, and I'll be asking our panelists, then do focus on that Q&A box, because then we can get back to you and make sure they're logged and questions are asked through that. So definitely go ahead and do that throughout the session. For those of you dialed in on the phone, don't worry at all that you can't access those two functions. You can text back the number which texted you a reminder for this session today with any questions you have, and we'll be able to ask them in real time. So I'm set up here to receive any questions you text back to that number. So don't hesitate to ask any questions even if you are on your mobile, and that's completely fine. That doesn't mean that you can't get involved. And secondly to that, if you can't text back for any reason, then we do have our student inbox, which you all have access to, hence the reason you're on the call today. So those are your four main ways you can ask questions, and all I'd say is very much make the most of today. We've got an amazing few special guests on today, and we're really, really lucky to have them. So do take this opportunity to ask as many questions as possible. So not too much of me. That's my introduction in terms of logistics, how this is going to work, and just a very brief overview in terms of what the session is going to look like today. We are first and foremost going to have a bit of an introduction of Duncan Wilson and Becky Bryant, who are our special guests, who will introduce themselves, and then we'll be doing a bit of a background on Duncan, an overview of the kind of roles which are available, and the kind of HR department on that respect, and then it will move into a Q&A session with myself and our special guests, and moving into a Q&A from you guys in the audience. So that's just a very brief overview. That's what you're going to get today, and enough of me at Pathway, and over to you, Duncan, to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I'm Duncan Wilson. I'm the Chief Exec of Historic England. There's about 850 of us spread over the whole country, mostly outside London in regional offices from Newcastle to Bristol. So, you know, we are quite well engaged with local communities and the decisions that are made about planning and how to look after our heritage. For those of you that can see the first slide, that just shows the range of what we do. So we engage, for example, with places of worship from parish churches to what's illustrated here, the Lam Rangaria Sikh Temple in Birmingham, where we've done some work to help save the building. In the middle, you've got somebody doing some survey work in Herefordshire, out in the countryside on a medieval castle. And then on the right, Bermondsey Street Festival in London, where we engage with the local community in finding out what's precious to them and how to protect it. The next slide is a bit about me and about how I got into this job. What I found amongst my 850 colleagues is there are a huge different range of different disciplines and backgrounds and ways people found into the roles they now play in protecting our heritage. Speaking for myself, my first big heritage role was at Somerset House in London, and you'll see that the bottom left image there of a huge pop concert in the courtyard at Somerset House. I've always believed that saving buildings wasn't enough. You actually had to get people engaged with them and enliven them, and often you do that by running different types of cultural event in them, which are maybe nothing to do with the building itself, but people feel it's an interesting place to come to, and then they have a cultural experience there and they feel a greater degree of ownership of that place afterwards. Bottom right and top right is the next place I went to, which was the Old Royal Naval College in Greenwich. Some of you may know it. The Painted Hall and the Chapel, Wren and Hawksmoor's amazing early 18th century buildings. But the bottom right slide is of Johnny Depp being dragged up the Painted Hall. We made a lot of money out of film location hire, and we shot Pirates of the Caribbean 4 there, which was fairly memorable for those of us that were involved. But you will see Greenwich in the background to a huge number of different films. And I think that illustrates the range of different aspects of our heritage that there are for people to engage with. Top left, my last job before I came to Historic England was at Alexandra Palace, and it is the Alexandra Palace Theatre, which we rescued. It had been derelict for 80 years, and it's now been turned back into a flexible performance venue, which works for comedy, it works for opera, it works for jazz concerts, it works for rock concerts. And of course, Alexandra Palace is a great event venue in its own right, so it complements what's there, but it's also part of the heritage of the place. So my background was I started life as an archaeologist, but then I left all that, became an accountant, worked in lots of different roles, but then came back to heritage later on. And I think that's what a lot of people find, that they can have different careers with different professional disciplines, but actually bring them back to bear on a subject they love. So the next picture is of Battersea Power Station with the Holi Festival, a Hindu spring festival known as the Festival of Colours, taking place in the foreground. Again, it illustrates the point that different cultural events can enliven old places and old buildings and make people see them in a new light. And I think you kind of get a symbiosis there that works really well. And the interesting thing about that for us is that it allows us to be creative and cultural too, as well as more technical. So I think it's really important to engage the younger generation in looking after our past. If we don't do that, then it will be forgotten and abandoned. And actually, I think there's an awful lot in our heritage for everyone if we work hard to bring it out and sell it to people. So one of the ways we do that is by social media communication of stories about our past and places and surprising discoveries, which we find is amazingly popular. We try and make sure we cover as broad a spectrum of our community as possible, so that even if a place seems to bear no relation to you today, you can find things in the past that you have in common with the people who built the place, maybe. We protect it by identifying the most important parts of our past and making sure they're not demolished or seriously affected by development. And we're prepared to speak up for places that we consider are at risk, whether that's from development or from falling down or not being looked after. And we have recognized that the way of achieving that is by engaging with local communities to get them on our side so that we're both faced in the same direction. And that's a really important thing. So we have people who are specialists at engagement and communication as part of our teams. And then the final slide I'm going to talk about, it does talk about our public engagement program. So we recently ran, top right, a program called Where Light Falls, which was part of our What Remains series, Culture Under Attack. We ran an exhibition called What Remains at the Imperial War Museum, which described how culture and our built heritage have been singled out as a weapon of war, and recognizing that from the Second World War onwards, how people had threatened our cultural heritage as part of an attack on our spirit as a nation. And we brought that to light literally with a couple of amazing light shows, one at the old cathedral at Coventry, which was of course bombed in the raids on Coventry, and one at St Paul's, which was bombed but mercifully not as traumatically as Coventry, in that the bombs were put out, the incendiary bombs were put out, and the cathedral was saved. And we think they tell incredibly powerful stories about how people will put their lives at risk to save our heritage, which is a very kind of current topic in a way. And then the other photographs illustrate something we listed recently. We are able to list what we call listing, list a building or a sculpture or a place as of outstanding historic importance, which means it can't then be destroyed or damaged. And this illustrates one of our more recent listings, which is something called Platforms Peace on Brixton Station, bronze sculptures commemorating the Windrush generation and their arrival, illustrated bottom right too. So we cover a very broad spectrum of cultural activity and heritage, and I think it's very important that we do, because we can't just protect the abbeys and the castles that people maybe like to visit at a weekend, and really make by doing that get everybody to consider their heritage as part of their national life, as well as on our list of things to be protected. So we're anxious to draw that as broadly as possible and engage as many people as possible in valuing what we've been handed down from the past. I think that's all I want to say at the moment. So maybe over to Becky, who's going to talk a bit more about our apprenticeship programs and our ways of engaging young people and recruiting people.
Thank you, Duncan. So hello everybody, I'm Becky Bryant. I am the Early Careers Manager at Historic England, and I am part of the Human Resources team. So obviously you've heard a lot from Duncan there around what Historic England do and what our work does to protect the historic environment and keep its public value. And I just wanted to echo again Eddie's thanks for you for joining this evening. And it's great to know that so many of you have joined this webinar. So I'd like to just talk to you a bit more now about firstly what I do, and then how you can potentially get involved. So my role is really just to look at ways that we can find opportunities for early career applicants to become involved and join Historic England. So I work with organisations like Pathway to engage with young adults who are considering a career in heritage and really finding out how they can make that happen and really enabling that for them. So we've got a few more slides to go through with you, and mine are more specifically about how you can be involved. So the first slide you would have seen was a group shot. Here we go, it's back again. Thank you, Ellie. Now, this is some of our recent apprentices that joined us. So hopefully finding out a little more about the work we're involved in and what we do to protect our historic environment has inspired you to consider a career in heritage. But you might be wondering how you can make that a reality. So there's never been a better time to explore a career in heritage, as there are now more options available to you than the traditional degree path. You might feel that an academic route may not suit your learning style and that you prefer to learn in a more of a hands-on practical way through real work experience. So the picture you're looking at is our most recent intake of apprentices. And I'm just going to talk you through about why an apprenticeship could be the right route for you. So if we just go on to slide 2, Ellie. So Historic England, we take a lead on developing new apprenticeships for the heritage sector. We're very passionate about young people having opportunities to do valuable work, connecting local communities with their heritage. Most importantly, an apprenticeship is not a lesser qualification than a degree. As I mentioned, which route you choose to your chosen career, whether it be a degree or an apprenticeship or something else, depends on your learning style and to some extent your personal circumstances. It is not always possible to fund university fees or be away from home for long periods of time, but that shouldn't stop you from achieving academic qualifications. For those of you who aren't aware how an apprenticeship works, it works on an 80-20 split. That means 80% of your time is spent on the job training and 20% is spent as study. Usually that would be 1 day a week at college or a block release training basis. In our current climate, that's more likely to be online at the moment. Now, during the course of your apprenticeship, you'll get real work experience along with your study and you'll be paid an apprentice salary. Now, this is set at a national apprenticeship wage, but it's often the case that employers will pay above this to reflect the work you are doing and to attract the best applicants. There are different levels to an apprenticeship, from a level 2, which is the equivalent to 5 GCSE passes, up to a higher level 7, which is an advanced apprenticeship equivalent to a master's degree and can take between 3 to 6 years to complete. It's also perfectly possible to complete an apprenticeship and then progress onto a higher level, all while earning a salary and gaining valuable work experience. So the slide you're looking at now is some of the new heritage apprenticeships which Historic England, along with some other heritage organisations, have been busy developing. Last summer, we recruited for our Historic Environment Advice Assistant and have 11 apprentices across our offices developing skills in planning and listing, helping to protect our heritage, our historic landscape. Now, some of these are recent school leavers. All of this work is about breaking down barriers for young people to work in heritage. We and other heritage organisations really want a workforce that reflects the local communities we serve, and we can only do that by making a career in heritage accessible to all. So we are now in the process of planning for apprenticeships at Historic England in conservation. So you'll see on that slide there, these are all the standards that are now approved. So we're planning for apprenticeships at Historic England in conservation, which will ensure the preservation of historic objects or collections, and archaeology, which will provide support during archaeological investigations, including surveys, excavations, and post-excavation analysis. So if we could just move on to slide 3 now, Ellie, thank you. So as Duncan's talk demonstrated, it takes a lot of people with a lot of different skills to protect our historic landscape. So here are just some of the types of roles in heritage. They all require different skills. Some might require you to be detail orientated, such as a data analyst or a mapping scientist, or in the case of a fundraiser and our education teams, somebody who is passionate about connecting communities and really wants to leave a legacy for others to enjoy through their work. As Duncan's demonstrated, the variety of work that Historic England is involved in and committed to is amazing, as is the variety of skills we have in our organisations. So those 850 people that Duncan mentioned at the beginning, you know, they vary from qualified drone pilots to marine archaeologists who dive to some fascinating shipwrecks in our channels. So slide 4, if that's okay, Ellie. So what can you be doing now or soon to set you apart from other applicants when considering a heritage career? Hopefully we've set your mind at rest that we aren't just looking for history qualifications. They help and they do show us that you have a natural interest in heritage, but what else is important? Having a sense of mission and legacy is what will make you stand out. We want to see that community matters to you. So if it's possible, try and do some volunteering at a local heritage site or museum. Now, if that isn't possible, try and think of ways that you can, or things that you can do to raise vital funds for a charity or organisation that matters to you, or perhaps get involved in some projects your school is supporting in the local community. Remember, Duncan qualified as an accountant. My background is in human resources, but we do contribute to future-proofing the heritage sector with the work that we both undertake. So my final slide. As I said at the start, we are committed to enabling young people to find work in the heritage sector. Now, each summer, which we usually run a scheme offering 2 to 6 week training placements to people with Black, Asian or minority ethnic heritage, who currently are most underrepresented in the heritage workforce. Now, under this scheme and since 2014, Historic England has placed up to 30 applicants each summer in training opportunities across the UK within a number of heritage organisations and charities. Several students in that scheme have now gone on to develop careers in the heritage sector in organisations like Historic England, the Heritage Alliance, the Conservation Team in Cambridge City Council, and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Now, we partner with not just Pathway, but we also partner with the Stephen Lawrence Trust and the Prince's Trust to empower young people to make that transition from education to employment. And they work with me on some great initiatives, such as the Prince's Trust You Can Do It campaign. So finally, before we go over to Q&A, I just want to say I hope you do consider a career in heritage, and from today's presentation, have a wider understanding of the variety of work this involves. I can't stress how much each of your individual skills can make a difference to the communities that we work within.
That's amazing. Thank you, both Duncan and Becky. That's really, really insightful in terms of understanding a bit more in terms of actually what are Historic England and your backgrounds at Historic England, but also what's on offer and what kind of, as a young person, you could be starting to think about getting involved in and in the future. So kicking off with just some questions, I guess, from my side. One question I'd ask initially is, so the majority of our students, so I've spoken to quite a few of them actually, in that age group now when they're thinking 16, 17, 18, what advice would you give yourself, your previous self, I guess, if you had to give yourself advice in terms of, you're both hugely successful now, if you had to give yourself one piece of advice, if you were listening now at the other end of this phone, this webinar, could you pinpoint one piece of advice that would be to get into the sector you're working in and be so successful?
Well, I'd probably say don't be put off if you don't succeed at your first attempt or even your second or third attempt. I tried a large number of different ways into this sector, and some of them worked, but actually the one that worked for me in the end was the most unlikely, which was becoming an accountant, working with government and the private sector, and then finding that I was bringing those skills to bear in the context of heritage projects where they were urgently needed. So, you know, I kind of went with the flow, if you like, but I wasn't too discouraged when I didn't get directly into the sort of jobs I was applying for.
Yeah, no, definitely. Resilience is definitely key in that sense for students. That's really helpful. Thank you. And Becky, would you echo that, or would it be a slightly different piece of advice?
I certainly think resilience, you know, particularly in our current climate, but I do stress that I don't think there's ever been a better time for accessibility to the heritage sector, certainly with, you know, the developing apprenticeships and also all the other, you know, work placements and avenues that there are. But I think, you know, that advice about, you know, seeing what else you can do to make you stand out, and knowing that, you know, if heritage is something you're very much committed to in your future, you know, do think about community participation more than anything, and what you can be doing, because, you know, that's really what links, you know, heritage and community together is, you know, how we participate. the last thing I'd add on that is just that, to take an old adage, is knowledge is power. So, do your research, get involved, see what projects are out there, but also, if you're thinking about applying to something, take some time to really, find out as much as you can about the organisation that you're applying to, because again, that will make your application stand out very much.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. So some good points there. So everyone who's dialing, I hope you've got a pen and paper in front of you, or you're jotting down some notes, because that's brilliant advice which you can draw upon. I've just had a message in from the Q&A panel, so that's brilliant. Thanks, whoever sent this in. This is from an anonymous attendee. So as you know, students, you can do it anonymously as well. So the first question that's just come in: what kind of skills does Heritage Work draw upon? It's quite a general question, but yeah, so that's what would you say to that one? What kind of skills do you get out? Obviously it will vary quite a lot on your role, but yeah, what are the key skills you'd kind of think you'd get from getting a job in one of those apprenticeships you've mentioned?
Duncan,
well, I would have to say, if I just come in very quickly, and then Becky can answer it in more detail. I think it's not just about the skills you can get, it's about the skills you bring. So it's both of those. We use people who have skills in areas such as surveying and planning and research, but we also develop skills for people who may come from very different backgrounds and maybe leave you with much more capability to find jobs in various sectors. Becky?
Yeah, that's great. And I would actually add into that in the early careers area, it's particularly more about what strengths you have, so what behaviours you can display. So we wouldn't be expecting you to come to us with a set of heritage skills because you haven't had the opportunity to develop those. What we would be looking at is behaviours that we can see that would enable you to be successful in whichever heritage career you had, you were developing. So for example, it might be that, as a behaviour, we would look for somebody who can display, really good communication, or somebody who has the ability to find the detail in things. And it might be that you've displayed that in a piece of work that you've worked on, or a project that you've worked on in your studies, for example. So really, at this stage in your early career, it's more about thinking about what the behaviours are and what the strengths you would need as a person to enable you to be successful in that role, rather than what skills you can bring, because skills are more based on what work experience you have. So whenever we put a job description together for an apprenticeship, look closely at what we've listed as what behaviours we will be looking for, because that's what we would assess you on when you come in for your interview or any kind of group participation work that we ask you to be involved in. So don't worry if you haven't got heritage skills right now. That's what we're here to do. We're here to support you with that and develop those with you. It's more about what you can bring as a person at this stage.
Absolutely. And
I was just going to add, I think it's really important you demonstrate a real interest and passion for the subject. You don't have to have a great degree of skill, but if you've looked at what's around your local area and know a bit about it, that's a really good sign that you have the passion that we all need to do this job.
Yeah, no, definitely, and that's such good advice. I hope that everyone's taking notes of those. I've just had, so there's 3 more questions already come in on the Q&A box. So Matt, thank you for your question. When can I apply for roles if I'm in year 13? So maybe that's one more for you, Becky, or
Becky, yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So we're in a slightly different situation in that, because I assume you're referring to apprenticeships, we have obviously been developing new heritage apprenticeship standards. Now, what will happen with those, because they are new heritage apprenticeships, they sometimes take a while to be approved for delivery. So we're sometimes reliant upon that approval being in place before we can actually recruit to those roles. So it's a little bit unique in that we aren't like some of the other organisations who maybe have an intake every September and openings happen in the November for the following year. We will probably get to that stage, but at the moment these are all new standards that have been developed, and we were actually the first organisation to recruit to the Historic Environment Advice Assistant Apprenticeships last year, so we're a bit of a trailblazer in that way. What I will say is that we do have very firm plans to recruit to more of those apprenticeship standards for certainly in the next 6 to 12 months. What I would say at this stage is, if you haven't already, please do sign up for our job alerts on our website, because as soon as we are opening applications, we will send an alert to anyone that's signed up to those, and you can do that through our website.
Yeah, that's such good advice. And also to echo that then, with being part of our Pathway CTM network, we are of course in such close communication with Historic England. So anyone who's been on the webinar today, you'll be notified through our communication with Becky and the team as well there, that we will let you know when any kind of availabilities are and when those applications open and close. So don't worry, Matt, we'll make sure that you're notified of those. But great question. Next question then, so from another anonymous attendee, how much of the roles involve actually working at the historic sites versus in an office?
I'm happy to answer that one, Duncan.
If you go first, yeah.
Yeah, okay. It really depends on which role you are undertaking. So the apprentices that we recruited last year, they are mainly based in our offices because they are developing skills in planning and listing. So they're giving advice to the public around planning guidelines, etc. But they do also spend time out on site. If I was considering an apprenticeship within Heritage, if, for example, I really wanted to be out on the field, then I would certainly look very closely at what that apprenticeship involves. So some of the apprenticeships are going to be based more in a support function, such as the Historic Environment Advice Assistants, which again is a very important part of heritage protection. But for example, an upcoming apprenticeship in conservation or archaeology might see you working more out on site. So it's really a case of which apprenticeship you apply to. But we do actively encourage all of our apprentices to visit sites, because I think that's really where they can see the value in the work they're undertaking. Duncan, do you want to add anything to that one?
Well, just to say that I think everyone would spend part of their time looking at things on site, because frankly you can't make judgments from a desk, but then you have to do some of the desk work to follow it up. Some roles are possibly, archaeologists spend a lot of time out in the field, hopefully in the summer, not the winter, but sometimes both. But planning officers, inspectors of historic buildings have to do a certain amount of desk work as well as visiting places, but they all involve kind of getting in touch with what's around us.
We did have another of our apprentices who is undertaking a geospatial survey technician apprenticeship, and she has, I think, recently just qualified as a drone pilot as well, and has been out on helicopter visits and all kinds of things. So it really is dependent on the variety of the apprenticeship you're undertaking. But as Duncan said, I know, very exciting indeed. But then,
she's based in York.
She is based in York, but she does also spend quite a lot of time in the office as well. So working with 3D modelling and things like that. So I have to say, I think heritage apprenticeships are very exciting, and I think there's a wealth of variety involved.
Yeah, absolutely, and sounds so varied as well, which is brilliant. I just want to do a little bit of a shout out, which I've seen in the chat box, which actually you might be able to see, but a message from Mia saying, I have to go, but thank you so much for your time. It's really interesting and helpful, and I'm definitely considering further researching heritage. That's great, Mia. Thanks for writing into the chat box. And it was brilliant that you actually you mentioned your interest in historic England a few times in events that we've seen you recently. So well done, Mia, for writing that into the box as well. Back over to the Q&A, then we've got another question. So from an anonymous attendee, regarding the summer training for minority groups, do mixed race students who are half BAME count? So I don't know if there's restriction. We can always follow up with the kind of you know, the how the applicable kind of nature of those. But Becky, in terms of that, how does that program really run, and how do you apply in that sense?
Okay, no, that's absolutely fine. Happy to answer that. So the scheme is actually run as a training opportunity. It's you receive a bursary during the course of what could be either 2 to 8 weeks. Now, there are a number of heritage organisations that get involved, and each summer, as I said, we place up to 30 applicants as part of our heritage training placement scheme. Now, in terms of background, the only stipulation is obviously that it's for Black, Asian and ethnic minority students. And the reason why this has been put in place is it's in response to a government white paper that was produced, which said that the heritage workforce is particularly underrepresented in those diverse ethnic groups. So we have been running this scheme since 2014, very successfully. Unfortunately for this summer, because of coronavirus, we have had to halt the scheme for this year, as obviously many of our organisations are unable to accommodate a placement this summer when there are such restrictions on home working and access to offices and obviously heritage sites as well. So do keep an eye on the scheme, because we are fully intending to run the scheme again next year, and it has been running successfully since 2014.
That's brilliant, really helpful. And also, if there are any questions around kind of practicalities of applying and who you know would fit in and is able to apply to that, then Pathway are also here to answer and help with those questions. So anyone who has any questions around work experience or any roles as they go live, again, next year we'll be notifying you of that work experience when it opens. So don't worry, rest assured, we'll keep you updated. So in terms of one more question come through then. So you mentioned social media. How can I get involved in the social media within these apprenticeships? Is social media a big part of any of the particular roles, or is it just an element in terms of when people are looking to apply to roles? It could be something which is used as example of interest in community and things like that. Quite a specific question, but does that?
Well, I would say it's both. Actually, we do encourage people. Especially, I mean, obviously apprentices tend to be younger people. Younger people can teach us a lot about social media, and we want to use those skills. It's kind of an example of what I was saying earlier on. We want to use those skills and deploy them to be effective. We are measured by our media impact. The government run a survey every year, and we are number 4 nationally out of public bodies, which is an amazing achievement, because frankly, you know, we're up against bodies like the health service. But that's because we have recognised social media is a really important way of communicating with people, and we have specialists in social media in our communications and public engagement teams. But we also encourage people all over the organisation to use social media responsibly to help us get the message out there. I don't know, Becky, if you want to say more.
Yeah, I'm happy to add something to that, which is just to say that we've focused quite specifically during our presentation on our heritage apprenticeships, but as we've said quite a few times, it takes a lot of people to make up our workforce. So as Duncan mentioned, we've got, public engagement and communications teams. And, we do also have apprentices in our organisation that are doing non-heritage apprenticeships. So we've got some that are doing customer service, we've got some in finance, we've got some in our HR team. And, just as a little carrot of information, we are looking at, how apprentices might work in things like our social media teams. So, apprentices play a big part in making up all of that workforce, and social media is certainly an area that we would be potentially looking to put an apprentice into if that's possible in the future.
That's great. So, hold tight, the anonymous attendee who asked that question, because it sounds like there's loads of opportunities there, and we'll definitely let you know. I'm just conscious of time now, so there's been so many questions, and brilliant questions too, so well done, everyone. Just to read out one other point, so from Phil Pollard, who also works at Historic England, who's on the line. Just a note, all regions have social media accounts as part of the HEAA. The apprentices will be contributing to running these during their apprenticeship, so that's very, very relevant to that that question asked. So really, really good point, good question to have asked, and that sounds like it would be part of what you were doing, so brilliant. I just want to ask one final question myself, which I'm sure is one which you might predict me asking, but it's really nice to end on, and then I will do our final kind of wrap up. But if you had to summarise one thing about working for Historic England, which you'd say is your favourite part about working for the company, and what you'd want to kind of leave as a note for the students today, what would that be? Maybe Duncan first, if you had to give one reason.
Okay, well, look, I'm going to cheat and give you two, because it is two for me. It is the feeling that you've actually left a lasting legacy to future generations by helping to protect what we've got and pass it on in better condition, because I feel passionately about it and I want people to be able to enjoy it forever. And then it is also the fantastic people I work with. I mean, they really do lift me up. So, it's those two.
And I have to say that I completely echo what Duncan has just said. And I was going to say that I feel that, what we do is a little bit about that legacy work. So it's feeling like you're making a difference. And I don't think you necessarily always get that, with other organisations. So what we're doing makes a difference to communities. So I'd say definitely that's the best thing. But for me, yes, certainly the people that we work with, I think well-being is the top of our agenda when it comes to our people. And we've won various awards for our mental well-being of our teams. We've won Gold Award for Mind from the Mind charity. So that's something we're particularly proud of. But I'd say lastly, in the role I'm in specifically, the thing I most enjoy is seeing our young people develop and being encouraged by the amount of expertise they've got around them, and also the amount of support that we try to give them. So yeah, I think it really is, just that whole thing around leaving a legacy, and then the people really do make a difference to our organisation and the work we're involved in.
Well, those are some amazing reasons, and a really lovely kind of note to finish on, in the sense of the questions there. I don't want any of you to drop off just yet, just to be super clear in terms of what the next steps are after today, because it's brilliant that we've had all of this information, and thank you so much to both Duncan and Becky for not only your time today, but also all of this information, which we can then help support our students with that have all dialed in today. So thank you so much. In terms of the next steps for all of you who've dialed in, firstly, again, thank you. That's brilliant to see so many of you engaged. We will be following up with every single one of you tomorrow with a survey, which gives you an opportunity to give any feedback and information after the session today. Just if you've heard anything today which you think you might be particularly relevant, one of the roles might be particularly relevant for you, then that's the opportunity to kind of give us a bit more information, and then we can follow up with you and provide any any information that you might need to take your next step towards a career with Historic England. So there are two kind of things you can do in the meantime. That's the key next step. But if you do have any questions after today's session, you can email us at student@pathwayctm.com. So all you need to put in there is your name and the fact you were on this webinar today, and any question you might have, and we have a team that will be able to answer any of those questions throughout the rest of this evening and tomorrow before you get your survey. And also I just encourage you to all follow us on Pathway CTM on Instagram, Pathway CTM, because then you can get access to all of the upcoming events we do have as well beyond this. So those two things you can do in the meantime, but hold tight for that follow-up and survey tomorrow. So thanks again so much to our panelists, and also for all the students for dialing in, yeah, have a lovely evening everyone, and we'll be speaking to all of you after today's session. So thanks a lot.
Great, thank you.
Thank you everyone. Stay well.
Thanks.